media contact list. That meant that anybody that wanted to talk to an astronomer, they could chase me down. I ended up being on television here, radio in South Carolina, on PBS twice. And 3 years ago, I was selected as an ambassador to Chile, the Astronomy in Chile Educator Ambassador Program. There's, I think, only been about 60 of us in that program over a few years. So I really keep my finger in a lot of pies doing astronomy and mostly educational outreach. And I do teach astronomy at Rover Comparison. If you want to know educational logic, I also am an adjunct at Central Piedmont. And they have a lot of courses in astronomy, a lot of people teaching astronomy. I'm the one person down there who has a master's in astronomy, and they don't use me to teach the subject. So that's academic logic for you. Anyway, Mars is our topic for tonight. And can I share my screen now, Ruth?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One question for you, Ruth, or somebody visible. I have several video segments that are included in here. And when I did this for a group in Utah Wednesday night, when I played the first one, they said the sound was not coming through. I expect it's probably going to be the same tonight, and that's okay. I'd rather do my own talk instead of having to talk over something else going on. So when we get there, anybody want to give me a thumbs up or thumb down on whether or not you hear sound from my computer? My expectation is it's going to be no, and that's just fine with me. I don't have to yell over top of it. But I just want to make sure how that's coming out. Okay. I'm going to share my screen because we're going to see some PowerPoint slides, and we're going to look at a couple of things online later on. Okay. Okay, here we go. Are you all seeing the slides now?
Yes.
Okay. You are not the Utah Astronomy Club for Women, but I am the speaker who's too damn lazy to change that 2 days later. Okay, we're going to do several things here. First, a little bit about Mars itself, a little bit about our fascination with Mars, and about our plans to get there. But the main part of the program will, of course, be about the Perseverance rover that landed successfully last Thursday. And as far as NASA and science are concerned, what a big deal that really is. So anyway, Mars in ancient times, it was prominent in Roman mythology, called Ares in Greek mythology. In Roman mythology, it was second only to Jupiter. It was rather high in their pantheon of mythological gods. It was the god of war and agriculture. And if you can figure out how those two go together, we have a job for you down at Central Piedmont, scheduling the astronomy instructors.
We're laughing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm doing a double take here. I've got this up on a side monitor so that I know what it looks like without zoom in there. And when I move the mouse right here, I'm seeing it off here on the side, and that confused me for a minute. Okay, facts about Mars. Distance from the sun, about 1.5 times our distance. Size, 4,000 miles across. It's about half the size of Earth. But interesting thing about that, being smaller in size, but having no oceans, the amount of land area to explore or inhabit or whatever we want to do is about the same size as the land mass on Earth. So if you've traveled around to the Sahara, the Andes, the Mongolian desert, and all of that stuff, you've seen the land area about the size of the land area on Mars. The features on Mars, however, are much different. We have a Grand Canyon. If you've seen that, I think you'll agree with me, there's no such thing as a picture of the Grand Canyon. When my wife and I went out there and she saw it for the first time, her jaw dropped. And when I saw it for the first time, same thing there. Thing is a mile deep and stretches across Arizona. The gash that you see across Mars here is the Valles Marineris. It's 4.5 miles deep instead of 1 mile, and it would stretch from New York to Los Angeles. We have mountains on Earth that we think are pretty high, but the Olympus Mons, an extinct volcano on Mars, rises about 3 times higher than Mount Everest, and the base of it is 300 miles across. Some wags have suggested that when we colonize Mars, it is going to be the go-to place for extreme sports. And there's certainly some truth to that. Being farther out from the sun, it takes Mars almost 2 of our years to go around. We're going to see in a little bit that the Perseverance rover was designed to last 1 Martian year, and that will be quite a long time. The day on Mars is 37 minutes longer than ours, pretty close to what we're used to. But the scientists working with the Mars rover, while that thing is active, they will go on a Martian day. They will set their alarm clock 37 minutes later every day. And their families, sometimes they'll get up and do homeschooling in the middle of the night because that's the daytime on Mars. The gravity is lighter. It's about 1/3 of Earth and about twice what the moon is. If you want to lose weight, I tell people the easy way is go to the moon or to Mars. Your body mass hasn't changed, but you weigh a heck of a lot less. It's expensive, but it will work. There is an atmosphere on Mars, but it's about 1% of ours, very, very thin air. And it's 95% carbon dioxide. So if you want to take your helmet off and take a deep breath, fine, go ahead and do that. But if you want oxygen, that's not going to work. But if you're very cagey in chemistry, look at that CO2 and you realize 2/3 of it actually is oxygen. If we could extract that, that solves a lot of problems going there. Okay. Getting there. You have probably seen in the news that this year we have 3 spacecraft arriving at Mars. Perseverance has landed. United Arab Emirates Hope spacecraft has gone into orbit around Mars. And China has its Tianwen-1 spacecraft there. The reason for the timing is not accidental. Mars being farther out goes around the sun a lot slower than we do. We can be lined up with it, or we can be on the opposite side of the sun. We take 1 Earth year to go around. I asked my astronomy class one time how many years it took the Earth to go around the sun. And I was dismayed at how many people pulled out their book to try to find that one out. Mars takes about twice as long, so they don't line up regularly. What we want to do when we go to Mars is use the closest approach and do that about 6 or 7 months ahead so that we can launch and have a 6-month journey there instead of 9 or 12. We get that launch window about every 22 months. It did come up last summer, so all of the 3 organizations trying to get there launched about the same time. We launched Perseverance on July 20th. If you're a real fan of space exploration, you'll realize that's the anniversary of Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon. But we launched during that launch window, and we get to Mars right now with current technology. The shortest possible trip is about 6 months. Perseverance took just under 7 months to get there. Okay, why are we interested in Mars? Giovanni Schiaparelli was an Italian astronomer, 1870s. He looked at Mars through a telescope, fairly small one for the time, but he saw what he thought were river channels. And he spoke Italian, as most Italians do. And he looked at those and said, hey, I see some canali. In Italian, that is river channels. But if you are familiar with the press in the United States, tabloids in the British Kingdom, British Isles, all around the world, reporters love to jump on things that they think they know. And you can imagine they saw the word canali and thought, oh, canals. There are canals on Mars. There must be intelligent life there. The way they reacted to that, I would vote more for intelligent life being there than in editorial rooms here in the United States. But the passion for Mars and the search for life there got started shortly after our American Civil War, and it has gone crazy ever since then. Percival Lowell came along. Talk about somebody that needs to get a life. the name Lowell will be familiar to you. Lowell, Massachusetts, textile town. The Lowell family, it's named after them, made the family very wealthy. Lowell was fascinated with Mars. He went out to Arizona for dark sky location and built Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff. He wrote 3 books about Mars. He was absolutely convinced that he saw life there. And he even drew pictures of all of these canals that he saw. There has even been speculation that what he was seeing was the reflection of his retina in the lens of the telescope, trying to explain why he could see something that wasn't there. But this guy was absolutely bonkers about it. Rest of the human race, well, War of the Worlds. Tom Cruise movie, if you saw that, not a very good remake of that. You know about the radio broadcast with Orson Welles back in the early 1900s. The story actually goes back to 1898. H.G. Wells wrote the book well over 120 years ago. Since then, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Robert Heinlein, Ray Bradbury, Mars has been basically subject of fiction for a very long time. Okay, being fascinated with it, we plan to go there. How are we going to do that? Here's the Spaceballs short version. NASA has the Space Launch System and the Orion crew capsule. NASA is one organization planning to get there. NASA does several things very well. One is design spacecraft and explore space. When they botch something, they do it spectacularly, but when they are successful, it is spectacularly successful. The other thing that NASA is really, really super good at is public relations and education. So they put out all sorts of spiffy posters. Phase 1, Earth Reliant. We're going to use the International Space Station and develop all the technology right here where we've got a safe escape back to Earth. Then we go out to the moon. They call it cislunar. I call it cisboomba if it works. But that's going to use the moon as a base for doing stuff away from Earth to make sure all of the technology works. And then Earth independent is where we actually head on out to Mars. The goal, they say early 2030s. I think that's optimistic. You've heard that NASA is going to put a man and a woman on the moon by 2024. Personally, I thought that timeline was a little optimistic. And in the last 2 weeks, I have heard that NASA is, quote, rethinking that timeline. Meaning that's their way of admitting, yeah, we can do it once Congress gives us the money. And Congress hasn't done that yet. So progress will be made. It will be successful eventually in our lifetime, I expect, but it's going to be slower than anybody hopes for. So anyway, Mars 1. I'm sure you've heard about this a few years ago. Anybody remember this? Anybody heard about it in the news in the last 2 weeks? Anybody want my estimate of their success?
Yeah.
Mars 1 is the plan, came out a few years ago. They were going to send 100 people to Mars and just leave them there, not return to Earth. And they made big whoop-de-doo about volunteers and all of this good stuff. They did have a billionaire from, I think, the Netherlands kind of bankrolling the thing, but the idea never really took off. This has been dead in the water for a long time. I still mention it because every once in a while somebody will pop up and say this, but they mentioned, okay, somebody say you don't have the technology, and they say, well, we're going to use the SpaceX launch vehicle. Reporter asked Elon Musk about that, and he kind of rolled his eyes back and do what? So this was speculative. I think it's been dead in the water for years, and I certainly hope so. It was a rather foolhardy plan from the get-go. SpaceX, you've heard about, Falcon Heavy, Red Dragon. Their goal was to get there in a few years. That's not going to happen. But SpaceX deserves credit for being spectacularly successful, using a reusable booster and landing it back, 2 of them landing simultaneously. SpaceX in a few years has accomplished things that NASA never even attempted. So their goal to get to Mars that's likely to have some validity. They're likely to be rushing there with NASA. But more likely there will be a coordinated effort, because if SpaceX sends people to Mars, they're going to have to use NASA satellites for communications relay and things like that. So it's a friendly competition that will end up being working together on some ways. Robotic missions simply haven't happened on that timeline. So again, Elon Musk, famous for his optimism, but also admitting that it may be too optimistic. Musk did say he wanted to send 1 million people to Mars. And my immediate reaction was that, do we even have that many politicians? I think it would be a great place to send them.
What did Mars ever do to us?
Pardon? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
No, my retort to that was, what did Mars ever do to us? And you're going to
yeah. Okay. The late entrant in this, Boeing Corporation, has said they were going to develop a spacecraft to go to Mars. Now, this may sound crazy, but it's really not. Boeing, some years ago, bought out McDonnell Douglas. And if you look back at the history of the space race, McDonnell Douglas produced a lot of the hardware for Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. So we've got two private companies here that want to go to Mars, and you've got NASA that wants to go to Mars. And frankly, I think we will eventually see the Chinese Space Agency want to get there as well. My expectation is that the next space race to the moon and then on to Mars is probably going to be between NASA and China. So that's my speculation there. I don't have any.
I hope not.
Pardon?
I hope not.
Yeah. If you are unmuted, I will be able to hear you, and I may have to ask you to repeat it because sound does not come through here too terribly well. We'll open up the floor for questions when we get done here, and I'll be happy to answer as many as I can. Okay, timelines, ridiculously optimistic. This slide is not even good anymore, but I threw it in because we were supposed to talk about that. Okay, problems getting there, cost, radiation, mental health. I asked my students, how would you like to be cooped up in the front of a Jeep Cherokee with your girlfriend or boyfriend? And they think that's great. And I say, okay, how about sitting there for 2 weeks? I said, welcome to the last Gemini mission. Okay, you and your family members that you don't like, you have to stay in your house, not during a pandemic when you can go out, but during a 6-month trip to Mars where you can't go out. Sustaining a colony, safe return to Earth, planetary protection, not taking our germs to Mars. So will we get there? Yeah, eventually. Okay, that's the fascination with Mars. Getting there, not so easy. Almost 60 missions to date, barely half succeed, but we do have 8 orbiters and 2 rovers that are functional now. Perseverance is that second rover. Picture on the right that you see is the Viking spacecraft that was launched in 1975-76. This is the first one to actually land on Mars. Now, keep in mind, we've been fascinated with Mars for many years. We are speculating maybe there's not Martians there, but maybe microbial life or something like that. So we get Viking out there. This was 45 years ago. And we wonder, is there life there? And one of the first pictures to come back, guess what? Yeah. Those reporters that were 4th generation from the one that said Canali meant canals, guess what they did with this one? Yeah. But we soon got better cameras, found that it's a mountain range, a small mountain outcropping. I'm glad that's not the face of a Martian, because if that was a Martian sticking out of his grave, that face would be 2 miles wide and 6 miles high. Not somebody I'd want to meet. Or the world's, I wouldn't bet on NATO. Anyway, Viking landed, sent back the first photo from the surface of Mars, and it looks like a muddy riverbed. Keep that picture in mind when I show you the garden spot of Mars in a few minutes. We did find evidence of past water on Mars. You've heard stories about the blueberries that were found. This image right here is about 1.2 centimeters across. It's about the size of the nail on your small finger, little finger. But blueberries, hematite, we know that here on Earth, they form in the bottom of lakes, ponds, rivers, and such. We have since found abundant evidence that Mars did have a watery past. So is it possible that life is still there? Maybe. Is it possible that there's past life that we might find evidence of? That's a big maybe. We have evidence that the environment was right. What we're looking for is, was there ever life there? Okay, water on Mars, on the left, Korolev crater. That is pure water ice, 50 miles across. So do you have to take all your water to Mars? Not necessarily. On the right, this is the North Pole of Mars, polar ice cap. It is a mix of water ice and dry ice, frozen carbon dioxide. You remember that carbon dioxide atmosphere I mentioned? In the winter at the poles, that will sublimate out of the atmosphere and form dry ice right there. That ice cap is about 600 miles across. So there's a lot of water ice there, and we could do something with that. We have to be careful about the weather, though. If you saw the movie The Martian, they had a big dust storm. That movie was scientifically excellent, except, remember that really thin atmosphere, 1% of ours? It can blow by at 40 miles an hour, and all you're going to do is, which way is it blowing? Very thin air. So it's not going to blow your rocket over sideways. Mark Watney didn't really have to deal with that. But dust storms encompass the entire planet. That can be a problem. Okay, getting rovers there. One country, one space organization, NASA, has been successful in doing that. Pathfinder in 1996 was a very small thing. Spirit and Opportunity in 2004 were a pair that worked together for many years. Opportunity is shown here just for size. 2012, Curiosity was a much larger, much more complex rover, still functioning. Perseverance and Ingenuity have landed just last week. Getting on the surface of Mars, let me digress right here and say this is actually very difficult to do. We have an atmosphere, so everybody thinks, ooh, parachute. But keep in mind, it's a very thin atmosphere. It takes a big parachute to catch enough air to slow that down. Now, for small rovers, we have used airbags and let them bounce around and then deploy. There are several ways to do that. We do use a heat shield to slow down in the atmosphere, much like Gemini and Apollo. We do use parachutes, but to get something heavy on the ground without breaking it, this is not an egg toss anymore. We can't use airbags to land a 1-ton rover. So we have to come up with something different, and we'll see in a minute how that actually works. But landing on the surface of Mars is not as simple as we might think. Here's a comparison. Down here, this is Pathfinder, 1996. This is a mock-up of Spirit and Opportunity. They landed in 2004. Their design lifetime was 90 days. I think Spirit worked for about 6 years and Opportunity for about 14 years. So we really got a return on our investment there. This is Perseverance. Slightly smaller version would be Curiosity. It was designed for, I think, 1 year, and it's all going on 9 years now. Perseverance is designed for 1 Martian year, almost 2 Earth years, but it will probably be equally successful. Okay, what's there? Orbiters, we have several. European Space Agency. Russians are collaborating with ESA on one. United Arab Emirates just got one there. China just got one there. And India also has spacecraft in orbit. So we've got a lot of orbiters working there, studying the surface and communicating back here with Earth. They also take pictures of what's going on the surface. Anybody that wants to say we faked the Mars missions, and well, okay, tell me where on Earth we found enough sand to fake something like this. This is a picture of what Perseverance looks like. A person standing next to it would be pretty tall right here. This is about 7 feet to the top. And this thing weighs about 2,260 pounds. It is very sophisticated. It has a lot going on. It has ground penetrating radar. It has a drill and spectrometers to get samples and analyze them. It has a place right here to collect samples for future return. It has MOXIE right here. Remember that atmosphere is carbon dioxide, but MOXIE is an experiment to see if we can extract oxygen from that. That would be a bit of technology that would really be helpful when we get people on the ground there. And of course, it's got the famous helicopter. We'll see a bit more about that in a few minutes. We'll also take a closer look at these towards the end. I've got a National Geographic website that shows a bit more detail about this. So we'll look at that when we get there. Ingenuity, first flight. This is something new. We have never flown anything on any other surface. There are only 4 bodies in the solar system that have a solid surface and an atmosphere. If I were in the classroom instead of teaching online, I'd ask my students to name those and see how many thought of Earth as one of them. I'm not sure they would. Venus has a very dense atmosphere. Mars has a very thin atmosphere. The other body is Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. It has a very dense atmosphere as well. But this is basically a drone. We're going to try to fly it. It is autonomous. It's under the belly of Perseverance right now and charging its batteries off the rover. Once it is released, it's going to be completely autonomous. It has a solar panel up here to recharge electricity that way. It has counter-rotating propellers. If you think about it, when the propeller goes one way, the rover, the underbody tries to turn the other way. So we've got 2 counter-rotating propellers to neutralize that. They are pretty large for the body of this because that is a very thin atmosphere. But this thing's going to fly sometime probably within the next week or so. The first flight will simply be to raise it and hover and make sure that it works. They have possibly up to 5 flights if everything goes well, just to ascertain the technology. It's got its own navigation. It's got its own computer. It has cameras to watch the ground. It's really a very sophisticated. If you were liking to fly drones here on Earth, you'd love to have something like this in your closet. Okay, here's the video. Just give me a thumbs up if you hear the sound, thumbs down if you don't.
Oh, now it's nothing.
Okay, I'm getting a couple of thumbs downs. This is just a promo that NASA did. The rover will drop Ingenuity, back off, monitor its first flight. Again, this is just testing the technology. We don't have any science experiments that depend on this. But future exploration, if we can fly a drone around, they move a lot faster than the rover. Okay, that was just a promo that NASA put out, but that's a big thing. There's all sorts of things that we're trying here that are brand new, and so far they work spectacularly. Launch was last summer, an Atlas launch vehicle. If you're my age and remember what they call the Atlas that launched John Glenn into orbit, much different beast. This is more like a 5th generation Atlas, but it's still called the same name. Once it was on the way to Mars, this is what was traveling from Earth to Mars. Basically 5 stages here. The cruise stage contained all the navigation and thrusters to keep it on track and whatnot like that. Basically, this was the brains of the outfit on the way to Mars. When it reached Mars last week, this thing separated and its job was done. It probably crashed into Mars somewhere. What we're going to see later on reentry is the back shell, the descent stage. This is called the sky crane. This is the rover itself with the helicopter under it and a heat shield. These four stay together during reentry. The real technology advance here is what we call the sky crane. It was used successfully with Curiosity in 2012, and this is a much more advanced version that can land a heavier rover. One thing that I'll point out here, these are 8 descent engines. When we see a simulation of this in a few minutes, we're going to see all 8 of those burning the whole time, and you'll see the flame coming out like people expect to see. That's a little bit misleading. When we see the actual landing, you're not going to see any flames come out because these use hydrazine. It's a hypergolic fuel. It ignites on contact. It can be throttled up and down. All 8 of those operate most of the way down, but when you get near the surface, 8 of those throttle back and basically become spares, and the other 8 do the maneuvering. The heat shield is jettisoned after it's slowed the spacecraft down. Parachute is contained right up in here. We'll see the sequence of how this works in a few minutes. Here's a landing animation, and you'll see those rocket engines spitting out flame and all of them running. Again, I assume that you're not going to hear any sound from my computer, so I'll give you a play-by-play here. Remember, I said NASA does great PR. These animations are part of the package. One of the benefits of being a solar system ambassador is I get free access to all of this stuff. Lots of neat stuff to put into programs. They're trying to build up excitement here about heading for Mars. And there was just a whoosh that you wouldn't hear in space. There's the crew stage separating. This is entering the atmosphere as if it were Apollo returning from the nice panorama.
Thank you.
They want to build up the excitement here. There's the parachute coming out. This is an animation because that's a very simple parachute design. Next thing you'll see is the heat shield being dropped. And it's going to crash somewhere. Now the descent stage is going, and there's all 8 of those descent engines slowing it down. You might remember Curiosity why we call this a sky crane. Once it gets in place, it's going to lower the rover on cables. Now this thing running on those rocket engines has its own brain, its own radar, its own cameras. It is programmed with the landing site and alternatives, and it's bouncing radar off the ground. It's comparing what its cameras see with images that it's got stored. And then once it lowers that rover, it's going to take off and crash somewhere else. Its job is done. It is expendable. There's the rover on the ground, everything folded in, and basically ready to go. Now, remember I said I was going to show you all the garden spots of Mars? Here we are. If you want to volunteer for the Mars One plan, go there and spend the rest of your life, fine. If you want to go with those million politicians that we talked about, fine. If you want to be a scientist in there, tell me how long I'm going to stay and when I'm coming back. It is a desolate place. Interesting thing about that parachute, the actual one had binary code in there, dare mighty things, and around the outer edge, it has the coordinates of Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. Somebody had too much time on their hands and decided they would make this parachute really fancy. Remember I said that the orbiters work with the spacecraft on the ground. HiRISE is a camera on one of our orbiters. I think it's on the Mars Odyssey. And it actually spotted Perseverance landing last Thursday. This is the parachute. There is the rover suspended under it. Perseverance is not going to transmit directly back to Earth. It's going to send its data to Mars Odyssey, and Mars Odyssey is going to relay it, kind of like a communication satellite. Here's an actual picture of the rover during the descent. This is a picture sent back during the descent. Previous landings, including Curiosity, we did not know exactly where they landed until we got some data back from them. Perseverance is the first lander that we actually got pictures back during the landing. We saw exactly where it was, and it became operational just as soon as it hit the ground. That's a first right there. All right, here is the actual landing sequence. And again, I assume no sounds. So voiceover on that.
Well, there was sound for a minute.
Okay, you are getting sound there?
It is, but we can't understand it. At least I can't.
I think it quit anyway. It was there and then it was gone.
Okay, I got one thumbs up, so I assume you're hearing this.
No, yeah, it was just at the beginning.
Okay, thumbs down. That was the actual heat shield being deployed. Okay, she just announced it's about 6 miles up. This is video from the actual landing. Now, if you saw this on television, we were not watching that live. We were watching that on about a 7-minute delay. By the time we were watching this, the rover was already on the ground. It takes that long for signals to get from Mars back. Depending on where they are relative to the sun, it can take anywhere from 20 minutes to get signals back from Mars. But this is what was coming in at Jet Propulsion Lab. They're under the parachute here, but the stage is actually looking at the ground, comparing photos with its memory, getting radar data back. And she just announced that it's about 2.5 miles above the surface. Okay. Yeah, this is a camera under the parachute. It's actually transmitting during the descent. And pretty soon we're going to see that rover. That little flash that you saw in the upper right is the descent stage engine thrusters. Okay, it's about a half mile above the ground. Pretty soon we're going to see that rover lowered on those cables. Okay, there you see the dust being blown up. There the rover's lowered. You see cameras looking in both directions. And look at those rocket engines. You don't see any flame coming out of them. That's because the hydrazine fuel doesn't produce a visible flame like we usually think of rockets. Okay. Now, if these people look like they're going crazy, there's a reason for it. Many of them have worked on this project for 10 years or even longer. We've spent years building that spacecraft. We spend months getting it to Mars. And with this landing procedure, there are so many things that can go wrong. It's worked once before, but 1 out of 1 is not a big track record. So they're allowed to get excited about that. Remember that first picture back from Viking? Here's the first picture back from Perseverance. If you want to know what Mars looks like, There you go. If you want to know what the other side of Mars looks like, there you go. If you want to know what the other, well, you get the picture. Panorama from Perseverance. Let's see. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Remember that sky crane flew away and crashed? Right there it is. The rover was functional immediately, and it has about 27 cameras. It has fore and aft hazard cameras that just look out for stuff. These are the aft hazard cameras. And they caught where that thing crashed. Of course, it had fuel left over, so poof, an explosion. But that actually worked right there.
I'm wondering why it crashed.
Pardon?
Why did they have it crash when SpaceX and
It's
others
just
were landing safely?
They probably use up as much fuel as possible just to get it as far away as possible. I don't really know an answer to that, Tom. Okay. I want to get back to my browser for a minute. Here is a 360 view sent back by the rover. You can find this online if you want to. Again, it looks fairly desolate, but there are a lot of differences in this. Remember those blueberries, the hematite I mentioned a while ago? Spirit and Opportunity found those in the first few months they were there. In the debate about robotic versus humans exploring Mars, I've heard a number of geologists say, well, it's great that the rovers found that in a few months, but if we put 2 geologists on the surface, they would have found it within 24 hours. So there's debates, pros and cons right there. The other that I want to show you is a detail about the spacecraft itself. This is a National Geographic website. And they have to get a little bit theatrical too. They want to show us landing on Mars. That is the landing zone right there. Here's the rover. 7 feet tall. And it has navigation cameras up front. This is a camera that was specially designed for this. It's very high definition. I've seen one picture that it looks like it's looking 100 yards off, and it shows something that's really about this wide. Shows it in very clear detail. But a lot of cameras these are the forward cameras, the 2 main ones that we use to take pictures. They use 2 so that they can take stereoptic photographs. On the back side of this, there is ground penetrating radar that can reach down about 30 feet. My wife and I were visiting an old plantation home in South Carolina a few years ago, and I saw a guy pushing something around. It looked like a lawnmower, but it wasn't a lawnmower, and there wasn't any grass to cut, but he had a grid marked out and he's going back and forth on it. And I finally asked him, and he said, oh, it's ground penetrating radar. We're looking for artifacts. Perseverance can do that as well. I mentioned getting oxygen out of that carbon dioxide. MOXIE is an experiment to see if we can do that. If it works, there's a very rich source of oxygen right there, not only for breathing, but also for rocket fuel. The robot arm right there has a sampling drill. It's designed to go down. A question I got Wednesday, and I don't know the answer to, is how far it will go down. I think it's probably something like a foot, but I don't know that for sure. That arm also has UV and X-ray spectrometers on it that can analyze the rock that it's seeing. This thing is going to collect samples. It'll bring up a core sample. It's a few inches in length. And it will store those on board. And I think it's designed to take 12 of those, and they will be left on the ground. NASA is working with some other organizations now for the retrieval technology. And that's going to be a few years out. It's probably going to be another 10 years before we actually get those back. But that will tell us more than we can do it with a robotic thing. If we can't send geologists where the rocks are, we'll bring the rocks back where the geologists are. European Space Agency is one that we're working with on this. And there will be an ascent vehicle to bring these back, and the smaller craft to be jettisoned from this and sent back to Earth. We'll pick that up in Mars orbit and bring it back. Okay. I love this one right here because the first person credited, his last name is Canali. Somebody had a good sense of humor on that one. Anyway, let's see. Do my Zoom thing here. Ruth, you can take control back here now, and we can open the floor up for questions if you want. Last comment I made when I was clicking through those last slides, you might have seen one that showed Marvin the Martian peeking at the camera. I always take that one along in case there's kids on there and wants to know if there's life on Mars. And I show them that one and the one following and show the Walmart on Mars.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, if you think about it, what's going to be the first commercial venture on Mars? Somebody said McDonald's, and I said, how about a McDonald's inside a Walmart?
Yeah. So, Jack, I think you have to click the red button to stop sharing. No, like, it might be at the top of your screen. It's either going to be at the top or the bottom of your screen.
Oh, okay. Okay, back to you. If anybody's got questions, I'll try to answer them for you. I may or may not have the answer.
How many rovers are there on the Mars right now, total?
There are a total of 5. Pathfinder, Spirit, and Opportunity have ceased operations. Pathfinder 24 years ago, Spirit and Opportunity in the last 10 years. Curiosity landed in 2012 and is still functional, and Perseverance just landed now. So we have 2 active rovers. One thing to think about, these rovers, I think Spirit and Opportunity, one of them traveled like 26 miles. That's like maybe across Mecklenburg County. Remember, I said the land surface area on Mars is equivalent to the land area on Earth. So, you know, maybe we've explored Mecklenburg County and part of Los Angeles. Not much else. There's a lot left unexplored. But those are the 2 rovers that we have operational right now. The Chinese Tianwen-1 has a rover, and they're going to attempt to land that sometime this year. Their schedule on that's not published yet.
Thank you.
Hey, Jack?
Yes, Craig.
You talked about the autonomy of Ingenuity. Can you expand on that a little bit? I sort of envision the managing engineers would send up a detailed flight plan, go north, look here, go south. What does autonomy mean in regard to this helicopter?
Yeah. Younger folks that grew up on video games think somebody is sitting at JPL driving this thing like a video game. What they don't realize, and what you're alluding to here, is that when we send commands to the rover or to the Ingenuity, the helicopter, the closest Mars and Earth ever get, it takes about 7 or 8 minutes for those commands to get there. When we're on one side of the sun and Mars is on the other, it can take 20 minutes. So these things are designed to be almost completely autonomous. What the control team will do with the rover is they'll have that rover look around, take pictures, everything that's around it for the next day's drive or what they want to look at. They may identify a rock they want to drill into, and they will send a set of commands to the rover, but it's basically a general what to do. It's not extremely detailed. This thing is programmed. It has a very high level of artificial intelligence, very detailed programming, and it is able to operate autonomously. When it's driving from one location to another, it has fore and aft hazard cameras. I think there's 4 in front, 4 in the back. It is designed, it's like self-driving cars here. It will drive around rocks and things like that. If it's told to drill into a particular rock, it will, probably the command is going to be something like a picture of this rock right here. I'm simplifying this, but it's like, okay, here's a picture and here's an arrow. We want you to drill into this rock. And it has the intelligence to go do that. But a set of commands are sent daily, but those are executed completely autonomously half the day.
Awesome presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. That's a good one.
Well, I was going to ask, I can understand us wanting to visit Mars for curiosity, for knowledge, but what's the appeal to actually want to live there? I mean, who would want to do that? Or why? I mean, especially in those garden spots that you showed us,
Yeah, that's not a science question. That's more humanities or philosophical question. And you can tell from my comments about the garden spot where my views are on that.
Yeah.
There was a time earlier in my life I would have volunteered. That marriage didn't last. Catherine is sitting here off screen watching with me. I'm not sure I would even take a 1-week trip to the moon now because I like my home life so much. There are people that would like to go. Mars One said we're going to send 100 people there and not bring them back. They did get 100,000 volunteers. Though volunteers were not with family support. I saw one interview with one guy that volunteered, and he was one of the finalists. He was all excited about going to Mars for the rest of his life. But the TV station that did the interview also interviewed his wife, who was going to be left behind. And she was not real thrilled about that. So the urge to go exists in some people. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's scientific curiosity, maybe it's a seeking adventure, maybe it's wanting to be the first one out there, or maybe it's just plain nutcase. It could be a wide variety of those. Establishing a colony there, Elon Musk sees it as a way of saving, a place to go when we destroy Earth. I think that's a very pessimistic view, and I don't think it's realistic. It's very difficult to even get 3 people up to the International Space Station. Getting 1 billion to Mars, whether they're politicians or not, that's not so easy. We are a long way from being able to afford that. SpaceX is working on a spacecraft that's supposed to be able to carry 100 people, but so far out in Texas, they haven't even been able to land it safely yet. They make some spectacular news, but am I going to get in that sucker and crash? We have scientific research going.
Those are experimental. Those are all experimental that they're flying. So to be fair, they're expecting most of them to crash.
Yeah, but I look at the early versions and extrapolate to what the later ones are going to be like, and I'm allowed to do that, Tom.
No, you are, absolutely. But I would point out they're going faster than NASA is. Yeah.
Next time you have your chance, watch the movie The Right Stuff again and watch the early rocket tests.
Yeah.
They interpose, you see the actor astronauts like John Glenn shaking their head and whatnot. And in between, you'll see actual rocket crashes. That's real footage. They were watching these things blow up before they volunteered to get on them. And SpaceX is doing that. But like I say, a product of my age. I'm in my 70s and I want something that's darn safe before I get on it. But back to Ruth's question, scientific research station on Mars, I think that's very likely. I think we'll see a permanently manned research station there, rotating crews, just like we do in Antarctica right now. You know, we send scientists down there for 6 months or a year at a time, and then they come home.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think in Mars we'll do the same thing. Yeah. Elon Musk and other people envision building cities on Mars. I don't think we'll see that. I may be good for another 30 years, and I don't think we'll see that in my lifetime. I'm not sure we'll even see it this century, or those of you that are still around after me.
I'm just thinking of like the amount of food and water they'd have to take with them to be able to sustain, because obviously there's not plant life or growing up. I mean, you could set up, I'm sure, a greenhouse maybe, and
yeah, if I could do a good Matt Damon impression of Mark Watney, yeah. I would say, hey, how do you like your potatoes?
Yeah.
There are plans to grow food there. It can be done. In the International Space Station, hydroponic gardening is one thing that's ongoing right now. To sustain on Mars, you know, you can't take it long enough potato chips to last for 3 years. So they're going to have to grow food there. They're going to have to extract water and oxygen. The technology is being explored now. Moxie is looking for oxygen out of the carbon dioxide. Hydroponic gardening going on in the International Space Station. A lot of this stuff is being explored. It's in the infant stages right now. That's why I say, you know, people setting foot on Mars in the 2030s, maybe, maybe not. Cities there, Elon Musk is never going to live to see those. Whether we have them or not, I don't know.
Your question is a long time, long duration, like century from now.
Yeah.
Would that be a possibility?
Yeah, it's like everything the government plans, the timeline turns out to be a lot longer than we think. It's like a lot of things that we do. You know, I have projects I'd like to get going on, but my wife walks in the room shaking her head, you know, it's not going to happen that fast. We all are that way. Mars, Ruth was asking about the appeal of doing it. I can argue that there's a scientific appeal for research like in Antarctica. I cannot give you a good argument that we'll have permanent cities there. We've never done that in Antarctica. So, but it's human nature to want to explore. And that's one place we're going to explore.
Well, I can understand exploration. It's just a civilian wanting to go up there and live on Mars. And I don't think they understand how difficult that is going to be to begin with. I mean, it's not like,
yeah,
you don't have your Harris Teeter right around the corner kind of thing. And
bingo, don't have a barbershop either.
Yeah.
Well, you did have a Walmart there. I mean,
yeah.
Good point.
Always in a protective suit to protect you against the sun rays and things like that.
Yeah, I did see an article come out. I believe it was either yesterday or today. Early speculation about growing plants on Mars that could be used to produce pharmaceuticals. You're not going to have a doctor. You might have a doctor on the crew, but what do you do if the doctor gets sick?
I suspect that may come in with printing technology when they get to the point of printing at the molecular level, which they're very close to doing.
Oh yeah, 3D printing. There's a 3D printer on the International Space Station. They print out some of their own tools and everything.
Well, they'll get to the point of medication.
That's a big part and parcel of it.
So yeah, there was sometime when, I think it was the Voyager 2, when it got past Enceladus, they decided to not get too close to it, partly because they did not want to infect it if there could be possibly a life there. Why did we decide to actually move things onto Mars just in case there is a life there and it might get infected by Earth living?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that actually is a very serious matter. When I had that slide earlier on about the problems in getting humans to Mars, about cost, radiation, psychology, and stuff like that, the last bullet point down there was planetary protection. NASA actually has an office of planetary protection, and all nations, I don't think there's any exceptions, all nations that send satellites into orbit, we now have agreements that we are going to protect not only Earth, Apollo bringing germs back, we found out that wasn't going to happen, but taking Earth germs somewhere else. If you watch these spacecraft being assembled, it's done in a clean room to keep them as sterile as possible. And the spacecraft that we send, if they're to land and explore, that we make them as sterile as possible. You mentioned Voyager going by Enceladus, one of the moons out there. When we have a spacecraft orbiting another planet and it gets near the end of its useful life, it gets low on maneuvering fuel, like the Galileo spacecraft at Jupiter, the Cassini spacecraft at Saturn. The agreement is we will not crash that or not allow it to crash into one of those moons. In the case of Galileo and Cassini, they were deliberately sent into the planet's atmosphere to burn up, just to avoid any possible contamination. Now, it's not foolproof, but we do the best we can on that.
I've always wondered why you get rid of those orbiters by sending them at right angles to the ecliptic, so you get north and south pole views, so to speak, of our solar system. It might take a couple decades to get them, but it might be interesting. Yeah,
spacecraft orbiting Earth and even orbiting the sun, they are in many cases deliberately sent into polar orbit so that we can do exactly that. Voyager 1 and 2 are taken off in two different directions. That was partly by design, partly because only Voyager, I think Voyager 2 is the one that visited all four major planets out there. Voyager 1 was never intended to do that. Voyager 1 was really, they were just backups for each other on Jupiter and Saturn, but they're going off in different directions. And they're, you talk about longevity, Voyager 1 and 2 were launched in 1977, and they are still functional. We're talking about data recorded on a magnetic tape, but it still works.
How big of a concern is planetary protection? Because that didn't even register for me. Like I'm thinking, like if there really isn't any life on Mars, how much of a risk is, introducing a few germs there? Maybe I'm being like a little bit too insensitive, but I just don't see that being like a huge risk.
Yeah. What we don't want to do is plant some germs there and then find them. That was our case going to the moon. We didn't want to plant germs there and then say we found life there. That's one of the big questions. That's probably the biggest question in astronomy.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. My wife is getting ready to leave the room so I can tell you about our debate. She's looking at me funny. She knows what I'm going to mention here. I'm allowed to do that. Probably the ultimate question in astronomy is, are we alone? Or is there life of any other form around? Now, our mock debate over Sunday dinner is, I say there's probably life out there. I'm the scientist that sees the chemistry of life everywhere. My wife, I'm a liberal Presbyterian. She's a conservative Lutheran. And second marriage for us, we actually divide our time between two different churches. You'll find us in both church directories and everything. So all of this is friendly conversation. But she's the conservative Lutheran whose theology is messed up if you think about life somewhere else. And I joke about it, but I understand that concern. I'm the scientist that sees all of the chemistry everywhere in the galaxy and think it's likely. So, it's Sunday dinner. She says, "So, have you found life out there yet?" And I hang my head down and I say, "No." And then I look up and say, "Not yet." And we do that about once every month or two. And if you listen carefully, you can hear her chuckling with me over on the side. It's a fun conversation. If you think about it, there are only two ways to answer that question about life elsewhere. One is, yes, we have found it. And that is profound in its own way. The other possible answer is not no. That would be equally profound, but we can't answer it that way. To say no, we would have to search every possibility everywhere in the universe. And we can't do that. So the only other answer that we can have is no, not yet. We may keep looking forever. We can reduce the probability that we will find it. You know, we can build a strong case that we haven't found it anywhere we've looked, so it's probably no, but we can't say no. We can say yes, or we can say not yet.
To answer David, your question on the risk, the bacteria from Earth could create risk for the life if we, since we are not sure if there's life or not at certain places. It's a risky move. And the other part is what Jack already told, like in the moon, when we got back our cameras and camera lenses had some life in it, and we thought there was a life on moon. It was actually what we had left.
One of the Apollo spacecraft deliberately landed near a surveyor spacecraft, and they brought back a TV camera on it, and it did have some germs on it. Again, newspapers went crazy with that, but the consensus that I've seen since then is that that was probably contamination from Earth. It simply survived space. You know, we use a white room. We try to make it as sterile as we can, but it's not perfect either. So the consensus is we didn't bring anything back from the moon. We sent it there and then brought it back. If there was some kind of award for technology innovations, I guess that would win one.
So technically, there is life now out there because we took it there.
Yeah. We're looking, I say life elsewhere. If there were a lawyer in the room, he or she would make me say other life elsewhere. And then we get in an argument that would go all over the place. I did have a retired lawyer take an astronomy class one time. And when we finished talking about the small bodies of the solar system, comets, asteroids, and dwarf planets, towards the end of the class one time, he just leaned back, clasped his hands behind his head. He said Pluto and the other planets did not like being called dwarf planets. So he was going to file a class action suit on their behalf.
I agree.
He did not know who he had talking to him. I did not skip a beat. I said, you go right ahead. You go ahead and file your suit. We're going to get it thrown out of court when we subpoena your client and Pluto doesn't show up. Okay. Well, it sounds like we're running down on conversation, and my energy's getting a little low too. So I think we can wind this up here if y'all are ready.
One more question. I know Sojourner or Pathfinder was at one place. Curiosity also was at certain place where it couldn't go too far. Now, in Ingenuity, we are attempting to kind of cover wider area. What is the what you call range for Ingenuity? How far can it go?
Oh, you mean the helicopter Ingenuity?
Yeah.
I think its maximum flight time is several minutes. It has a fairly small battery, and there's a limited amount of charging you can do with that small solar panel on top. Ingenuity is not part of the search for life or anything like that. It's simply a test bed. It's a test vehicle to find out if using basically a drone on Mars is going to work. Now, if it is successful, they might use it for taking some pictures or something like that. But other than that, it's not going to do any research.
But it's going to find out which are the places are safer for rover to go to.
Say that again.
It can be used to find out which places it is safer for rover to go to easily.
It could, yeah. That mast cam 7 feet off the ground, so it can see quite a bit as well. It's possible that they would use the rover to scout, kind of a scout looking ahead. That's a possible use of it. But again, this is just to test the technology. It's not intended to be part of the research. And you mentioned the rovers being in different places. One of the reasons for having so many orbiters around is to study the ground. And this landing location for Perseverance, the Jezero crater, it was picked because we know that it used to be a lake bed. We've studied the entire planet quite well, and the landing targets, the landing sites, those limited areas. You know, why would we pick Mecklenburg County out of the whole United States to land in? It's because the geology there is a place that may have, you know, that was a, we know it's, we're almost convinced that used to be a lake bed, and water is where life occurs. So we're going to learn a lot of geology there. Whether we find life or not, I don't know. We may not. You know, Catherine may be very happy to say, hey, you didn't find it there. But we picked the landing locations very deliberately because of what we think we might find. There's a nice image there. I did not include it in my PowerPoint, but there's an image taken from Perseverance. It shows the lake bed. It shows layers of sediment that where the edge of the lake probably was. And we were able to identify from color and other stuff what some of the minerals are there. And farther off up the hills, different layers. That sedimentation is where we can learn about the past on Mars. But again, all of this is very planned out in very great detail. Give us the best chance to learn as much as we can. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Jack, for presenting tonight.
Yeah, thank you. It was very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We always enjoy your presentations.
Thank you.